Hello, Matt. It's such a pleasure to see you. You've got such a great smile and like your face just lights up and I can just feel your positivity. So I'm just so excited to be talking with you today.
Thank you, Sandee. It's you. That's what makes me light up. I'm so looking forward for a conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I love everything that you're doing. You're a podcast host, you're an author. You've got some great course offerings, and we're going to talk about all of that. But before we get there, everybody has a story, and I love hearing people's story because I feel like that's when we really learn. Like going back to 1,000 years ago, that's how people learned, right? It was all storytelling. And so I want to hear your story and how you got to this point where you've got this book, The Z-isms, which I want to dive into that as well. But how did you get to this point where you're doing all these amazing things?
Well, it's funny, we ask, what's your story? I'm thinking, how long of a form of podcast is this? It's funny. I'm reflecting because I hit my mid 50s, like I'm officially in my mid 50s. And it's like, oh, things by the decade. And, that seems to be the right way to answer the question in what has shaped me in terms of my life. One of the things we talked about pre-show we have in common is that I'm an ice hockey player. Yeah. Well, at least you're on blades, different.
I'm on blades.
But
I actually wanted to be a hockey player because really? This was back in the 70s. I just had a birthday last week. I'm on the other side of mid 50s. I'm like pushing the 60s and I'm like, but it's just a number. Age is just a number.
It's a number, of course.
It's just a number. It doesn't matter. I'm young at heart. But I wanted to play ice hockey because my three brothers played ice hockey and my father coached. Huh. Well, women did not play ice hockey in the 70s. So they put me in a tutu. I was the biggest tomboy ever. They put me in a tutu, put my hair in a ponytail, and put me in figure skating lessons. And I loved it. When my son was born, he was born in the year 2000, and I had already been he's in college now. He's a senior in college. I had already been coaching hockey players. So I had a pair of hockey skates, and I was like, I want to play ice hockey. So I got all the equipment, and I geared up, and I got out there, and it was awful. I could outskate every single woman out there.
Right.
But being in all that equipment and like holding the stick and so I only lasted a couple of sessions and I never actually played in a game. I guess my femininity finally came out probably in my 20s and I'm such a girl now. So like, sure. It just wasn't my thing, but I respect and appreciate the sport more than anything because you're on ice, my favorite surface.
I mean, we could have the whole conversation about this, I'm sure. And it's, real fast, I actually have an opposite story because I was training up in Northern Ontario growing up. I was very serious into the sport and there was a silver, I know you're a medalist, and there was somebody who was the power skating coach was the silver medalist and wanted to see if I had the aptitude, if you will, to become a figure skater instead. So I switched skates, did that. And all the falls I took, I was getting hurt more trying to figure out how to figure skate. I was like, my hips are not built for this. I'm not doing this. And I only had a few sessions. So we have our own war stories, but
there you go.
When it comes to my lifestyle, my friendships, my love for the game, and even to this day, I still play at least twice a week and I just so enjoy it. And I know you can relate, right?
Oh,
something
completely.
like that for anybody becomes a part of you, and it's a passion that never lessens.
Do you like walk in an ice rink and it's like coming home and your mom just baked an apple pie and you're smelling the apple pie and it just when you walk in an ice rink, they all pretty much smell kind of the same. I don't know. I think it's the flooring or whatever. But like I walk in an ice rink and it's just like I feel like I'm home. And I always get this warm and fuzzy feeling of like, oh, like this is home.
Well, I imagine as much time as you and I both spent in ice rinks. It's probably not far from the truth. But sure, I mean, that's something I started at, very young. And then, it alternates, right? We have other things that we go through in life. And another defining part of mine is depression. I've had to contend with it since my teens. Didn't exactly get the best gene pool in dad was bipolar. My mom was a depressive. And so I didn't really realize it until I was into my 20s because I never really sunk that, as deep until then, but it's something that I've had to learn how to manage. And it wasn't until I wrote the book, and I have a chapter in there about mood health to speak more generically about it and how do you manage it, that I've been more of an advocate. It's been something very private, before then. But now, especially with the pandemic, trying to normalize the conversation, especially as a man, it's something that I felt has been very important to, step out in front and do. And my family health, my parents in that way, my mom, was actually got very sick, and when I was young and passed in my late 20s, seeing her through that was certainly very defining. And my brother Dave, went through an opioid, at the worst of that. And we lost him in 2012. So those kinds of things, certainly are those that shape you. I also no longer, but I was a single dad. So in 2002, right, my son's still in doing diapers and bottles. That was really important to me, and I was a 50% dad, which I think was kind of unusual back then. And I also and I wouldn't trade it for the world as hard as it was. But it also forced me to balance it out because I needed the freedom, and it was the right time for me to step into being an entrepreneur. So that was the other side of it. I had been in the marketing communication business. I founded a nonprofit called the Internship Institute, ran that for 15 years up until the pandemic. And it was kind of a final blow to internships, but it was also when the book came out. So I turned the ship and now, into the publishing company. But those are, some of the highlights of my story and the things that really combine in the lessons that I've learned through life that were different than I've heard people articulate them, and some mind hacks, if you will, that have been really well received. I'm really glad, in writing the book and then all that's come from it, including being here with you.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of media appearances, so that's really awesome. I love your speaker one sheet. All right, Z-isms. Let's talk about that. So what is that? It's insights to live by. So Z-isms is obviously a play on your name, right?
It is. I mean, there's a whole story behind it, actually, that we don't have time for in the way that it became that name. It wasn't just a straight up I'll just leave it at that. But, Z-isms are insights to live by. The book is not, quips and quotes or anything. It's full fledged. But these are the life lessons that all of us have come to experience and know and share with others for the purpose of improving, positively affecting other people's lives. So we all have our insights to live by, and those are mine in the book and the stories and lessons built around them.
I love it. I love it. It's funny because when I met my current husband, I was married for 21 years. I was with my ex-husband for 25 years. I was 21 when I met him. So it was, my entire adult life. We're very, very close to this day. And we have our son that we raise. And, but it was interesting because I would react in a certain way when my now husband, we'd get in an argument or whatever. And he finally was like, "You're having a Markism." Because my ex-husband's name is Mark. He goes, "That's a Markism." And I can share that on my podcast because I've shared it with my ex-husband. And I was like, "Don't get upset." I'm like, "It's actually kind of funny." And it was just kind of like the thing that sometimes we react in a certain way based on our past experiences. But in a different relationship, it's a totally different context. So I love that there's isms because they really are kind of like a thing, both negative and positive. So share some of your Z-isms that are your insights to live by.
Well, thank you. I mean, look, they're throughout the book and they're highlighted in a sense to, reinforce different concepts, but, we're really covering a wide range of topics in and around mindset, wellness, relationships and interactions, entrepreneurship and career, your life purpose, right? It's just, I put everything I had into the book. That's what it's about. So I could certainly go in a number of different directions with the answer to your question. I'd say that I'd start with mindset because everything really begins there. And for what it is that I speak to and train on, that you have to address it, and really 3 areas around perception. And I think starting with perception, I think people don't realize, right? And we're just living and experiencing things in our days, but what we experience is not necessarily the truth. And we have to recognize that we are filtering, and maybe we're in an argument with somebody, and we might both think that we're right, but doesn't mean either of us are wrong. So there are those kinds of things that we speak to in and around perception. The second thing is called earned confidence. This actually came about through my experience in caring for my mom, in and around the fact that really for everybody, we've all been through, and this is part of your show description, everything we have in our lives, and we have to remind ourselves that we've overcome them. We're still here. We're all standing. Yeah. And part of the role of earned confidence is to remind you that you don't have to deal with uncertainties, particularly worry and anxiety and things like making assumptions, jealousy, anything that isn't fact-based. You can just deal with the real. So earned confidence really speaks to that. And in and around the entire mindset part of what I speak to, you're really trying to ground yourself in the present. So the role of earned confidence is to ward off future uncertainties so that you can really stay in the moment. And then, of course, we have our past baggage. So we talk about winning the battle within. And what's really at the heart of that, Sandee, is something I think distinguishes itself in the world of personal improvement and just life enrichment, which is self-kindness. Because when people are trying to work on themselves and they're like, well, I feel crappy about myself, or, I want to feel better. It's very nebulous. It's very difficult to get from here to there. You don't really know what to do, in a sense, right? It's not clear cut. Self-kindness is clear cut because you're either being kind to yourself or you're not being kind to yourself. So you're really drawing, much like earned confidence, you're really drawing that line. And the buy-in is, of course, why be anything less than kind to myself? It's pretty easy to buy into. And then you can rely on that to start to address the things that you're hanging on to, not being resentful, not having regrets, all the things that go into that past baggage category, so that you can live life right now.
Yes.
So, right.
Isn't that what it's all about?
I mean, that's the mindset section, right? I know we're not a long form show here, so I'll just leave it at that.
Well, we want our listeners to pick up a copy of your book. Love it. Yeah. And those are incredible. And I love that you said, when it comes to worry and stress, deal with the facts. I always tell people, if you can control it, then don't worry about it because you can control it. If you can't control it, then don't worry about it because you can't control it. Right.
Right. Well, look, it's a habit for a lot of people, and some it can be somewhat cultural also. But what's important is that we all do it, and you can have that 2020 hindsight when we look like, oh wow, I thought something was going to happen. I called 5 friends. I got my stomach turned on me because I was and then it never happened. And then you have to stop and you're like, what did I do to myself? What did I, do? My friends who are there for me, of course, but they're there for the things that really are real, not, imposing. And that's really important because we do have a responsibility for our own energy and how we impose that on other people. And so that's another component in wellness is around energy management. So, they all begin to intersect.
They completely do. And it's all interrelated. I mean, really. And how we show up in the world is so key. Okay. You have another book coming out next year. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a little bit under wraps, actually, as a matter of fact. I haven't been asked much about it. I will say this. It really is an evolution of Zisms. In fact, when I first published the book, I was asked, well, you have a second book. And I'm like, ask me in 10 years. I mean, I don't know. I put everything in this one. But that's not how it goes. And, things continue to evolve. And the concept around the new book is really a culmination of Zisms and how it has grown and matured in and around the concept of happierness. And the reason why we're talking about happierness is that I couldn't quite find a way to describe optimism in the present tense. Because when we talk about optimism, it's like, well, I'm hopeful. I'm looking toward the future. But, what does it mean to have a reflex of positivity, that we have a choice in terms of how we react to the situations that we encounter, no matter how bad they are? And, of course, you have to go through what you have to go through. But do you really need to put yourself or others through things unnecessarily when there's a certain path that you can take through your experience to cope and manage and be resilient, and all the things that fall under it? So it certainly revisits a lot of the way things in a way click into place as Z-isms has continued to evolve, particularly into the courses too, for that matter. So
you have a definition of happierness, and I love this. It's a noun. Because I was like,
it's a noun.
It's a noun. The premier mindset of Z-isms is to be intentionally present and have a reflex of positivity by choosing to make the best of every situation. I love that.
Thank you.
Because
good, because the next book's coming, and I feel like that too. So it's around that, and look, it continues to evolve, and I'm chipping away at it. I'm getting close, and I'm waiting for the right moment. I actually am slated to do a TEDx, and so
nice.
I have to wait because TED doesn't want you to have a book out, so I've got to right. So I have to wait.
Always, because a friend of mine has a book out, and she's done 2 TEDx's so far. I think it just depends.
You have a better chance, and they receive the topics better if they want that originality, and it's not connected with marketing. So it's when it's due time. Happiness isn't going anywhere, and when it's ready, it's ready.
And you know what? I just know, like, because my 3rd book came out, although the 3rd one I'm a co-author. When you write a book, it's never finished, right? Like, you could review it and review it and review it for 50 years, and it would never be the perfect manuscript. So you have to reach a point where you're like, okay, I got to get this book out. And then there's always a second one. I can always just take the first book and make it even better. And so that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've, again, going back to, where this all began, I really didn't expect to be doing and going in the direction that I am now. And in part, as an outcome of the pandemic and how I, one of the other Z-isms, of course, is to swim with the current. So when you find yourself in whatever situation, even if it's a conversation, you're like, I'm pretty willful. Like, this just isn't going my way. I'm just, like that push the boulder, right? You got to turn around. What does it mean to turn around, whatever that is? Because, you're swimming against it, and you have to turn around before you drown, essentially. So trust your gut. That's where that one goes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. You also have a podcast called Insights to Live By. I love this. Thanks. So when did you start that, and talk about that a little bit?
Thanks. Well, it actually started with the pandemic. I was doing a lot of these kinds of interviews, and a host asked me, "You ever think about starting your own podcast?" I was like, "No, I didn't." And one thing led to another, and I started, kind of playing around with it, and it started to take off. And I was doing a lot of solo shows in the beginning. Do you do solo shows, or you're just guest? Right? Because solo shows are so intensive, so you want to do it right. But I enjoy more now doing the guest episodes. So I have people come on different walks of life. I've been covering a lot this year around the world of work, because the shifting that's happening there, and because the work that I'm doing has shifted as well in that direction, for people to share their insights and their expertise in the topics at hand. But it's got a formula to it. And at the bottom third of the show, we have 3 insights to live by. What are your life lessons that you want to share? It could be on anything. We talk about it. So I enjoy doing it. I had one. I recorded one earlier today. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
There was one time I was a guest host for Emotional Intelligence magazine, and for their podcast, and I did it, and it was tough. That was a tough ask. I did it. I record it in 5-minute increments, and then they put it all together. But yeah, that's it's not easy. For people that can do that, that's really awesome, because it's not an easy thing to just sit and talk by yourself.
When you have so many other things going on too, it's, to home in, right, to talk by yourself. It's like, I have to pretend like I'm on a webinar where people are there, but you're not really sure they're there. Audience, I have to imagine there's an audience, because it doesn't come across authentically if it's like just me, myself, and I.
I know. So, well, and that's true. That's true. And it is. It's doing things online is so much different than being in person. Let's talk a little bit about your courses before we finish up, because you've got a Wellbeing Reset Employee Enrichment Program. That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about that. That sounds really incredible.
For sure. I originally, have a course called the Life Upgrade, which mirrors the book in essence. And that's mainly for consumers. But as I got more into the world of work, and I'm looking at all the things going on around burnout in particular, and just the underlying pandemic, if you will, or even epidemic, in and around mental wellness. I mean, it's well established, that these are problems, and covered emotional intelligence as well. So I developed other content that's really more suited for companies to support their employees in wellness programs. And it really covers mindset. There's a mindset reset, right? That's a standalone course. That's also module 1. It's the same module of the Wellbeing Reset, of the Life Upgrade. So you can just kind of step into the next. And then we get into wellness. We talk about mood health, being a life athlete in terms of those life skills, things like prevention. People don't think that, a Z-ism, right? The best way to manage a problem is just not let it happen. So how do you do that? So we delve into prevention, and we get again into energy management, personal energy as like being an entrepreneur, interpersonal energy we talked about in terms of recognizing that there's an exchange here and our responsibility, to ourselves and others there, and universal energy, right? Law of attraction and manifestation and things around that. So then it gets into to mindfulness, a whole module there. And I also, we're making the ebook and the audiobook of Z-isms available. And for different reasons, Sandee, I never published the audiobook. So
Did you record it yourself?
Well, yeah, because it's all my personal anecdotes. So it didn't have to go far. Like there's only one narrator here. And that was part of the equation too, that to read a book into a microphone, it's like, a lot of people would say the same thing. It's like, oh my, that'd be so boring. Right. So I did a few things to liven it up and change the format, and now it's done and in the courses. Nice. So I'm really, really happy with that. So thank you. Yeah. I mean, look, the issue with the book is, as important as it is, why anybody writes a book, is that it has its limitations, and some things just have to be experienced to be learned. So rather than the book and its personal anecdotes, the courses really don't have the personal anecdotes. They're focused on activities. They're self-engagement. And so a lot of people actually say that it's almost like having a different therapy session on a different topic, and it's just like, at their own pace. So, So, there's can I mention the site for people to learn?
Please do. Yes, absolutely.
So the Wellbeing Reset is at wbreset.com. And, I always kind of find it awkward to be a little commercial. I'm so proud of it. I want people to go check it out. And that's the whole point, is to benefit from it. So, thanks for letting me share that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing, because, we're all, somebody called me once a soldier of something, but it's kind of like that, right? Like we're all here. We may say things a little bit differently. You've got your Z-isms. I've got my own thing, but we're all have the same mission, which is to enlighten the world and help people find that happiness. And, life is short. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I really appreciate it. I will make sure your website and everything is in the show notes, and so people can find you and order take a look at his book. And we'll stay tuned for your new book. That's exciting.
Yes, it is coming, I assure you. Thank you again for having me. Thanks
All
for
right.
everybody who's with us. Appreciate you.
Thank you.